Hey guys, Dave from Nerdarchy, for nerds, by nerds, hanging with these nerds, plus Brian Feister today.
Hey, I'm Ryan.
I'm Ted.
And today we'll be talking about a brand new RPG that's in development. It'll be coming out soon. The Kickstarter is going to be launching very shortly. The Open Legend RPG.
If you want to jump down to the description below, you can sign up for Nerdarchy the newsletter. It's a great way to get gaming tips as well as learn how to game with Nerdarchy.
And also find the link to this Kickstarter when it's live.
Exactly.
Nice.
So, well, we can link to the to your website, absolutely, so they can find you. And there's also, if you check out Encounter Roleplay, there's a ton of gameplay videos out there. And we're also going to be shooting a gameplay later on today, so you'll be able to check that out as well. So I guess let's kick it back to you, Brian, a little bit about you and why you felt the need to create Open Legend.
I created Open Legend during the dark ages of role-playing game history, which was the end of 4th edition.
So you felt an urge with that. A man was chosen to rise amongst the ranks to create a new role-playing game. It's like the opening of the Hercules Kevin Sorbo version.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, you nailed it. Yes, that's what happened. I liked, and actually, what's funny is a lot of people. It's real popular and easy to take shots at 4th edition, but I have borrowed some great stuff from 4th edition that is in Open Legend actually. So we'll talk more about that later. But long story short, I felt like a lot of the mechanics really controlled the dialogue of like sort of how the game played out and the narrative behind the game. And Open Legend is very much about the opposite, where the mechanics take a back seat, or they serve as a way to make sure the game is fair, and that's what rules are for, right? And then but it takes a backseat to the story because many of those mechanics, or each mechanic, can be connected to many different storytelling narratives. So, for example, we have this concept of banes, right? So persistent damage is a bane, and that could either be bleeding damage from like a rogue sneak attack, or it could be poison damage, you know, from a poisoned weapon, or a mage's fire that just keeps burning and burning you after, right? And so the idea is that we don't step in and introduce an opinion there. Players are free to do whatever they want. But the mechanics just make sure that it's quantified, right? Because that's what we need, is just to make sure like you're X level and X power, and therefore you do X and Y damage and stuff like that.
So in a lot of ways, we're very familiar with this from Mutants and Masterminds, where a lot of the game that you've created is effect based, right? So the mechanics define the effect. Yeah. But you know what that effect looks like, how it interacts with the world. That kind of is up to the player to interpret.
Absolutely. And it also has that sort of that asset of being sort of setting gnostic, where you could play modern, you could play superheroes, or you could play fantasy, and the system will do all those things eloquently enough, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And that's and like in our first campaign setting, which is a companion for the Kickstarter, it's the core rules plus the campaign setting. We have really strong elements of like steampunk, sort of modern, and then there's a sci-fi element, and then there's a high fantasy magic element. So that's just an example of blending genres and stuff like that. So
I think one thing has to be mentioned since you showed up in uniform. It's very important to us. The running joke is our uniform is beard and glasses. So you came ready to work today. That's always a bonus.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I noticed. I've watched some of you guys' videos, and I thought that was funny too. So I didn't know that. I did not catch the reference to it being the official uniform, but yeah,
it's not in every video.
We're all walking cliches.
Me too. Me too.
So you have this sort of open source game system, but then you're definitely building a world around it. So is that very well fleshed out? Is like a lot of the fiction sort of shaped already for it?
The world?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of it is shaped. I've been running this campaign setting for 2 years now, and so I've been building it while I was running it. So my inner circle of my like dev team, where I've tested and hammered out the rules and the mechanics themselves, this is the story from that game, right? So yeah, a lot of it's been hammered out over a while, and then now there's like a whole different crew of writers that are on the team that are totally changing what I had, which is awesome. I mean, I don't mind. You know,
right? You can't be too precious because sometimes just other people have better ideas.
Exactly.
Now, I've heard tale about some of the writers that you have coming in. Do you want to mention?
Spoil
I have a theory.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
My theory is Brian's been working on this beard for a while, and finally it got to the point where he could ask Ed if he could mentor him and if he could apprentice under him in beard.
It's
in
like beardomancy.
Beardomancy. Yeah. Oh man.
So are you able to go into that, or is that something that's under wraps?
Sure. I mean, we can. There are certain things that I won't go into, but we can definitely talk about it. And
we'll let you lead here, so this way
we don't spoil anything.
Yeah. No. But I'm happy to say, like, I'm super excited. You know, people ask me all the time, how did this happen? So for those who don't know or haven't heard, we have some great writers, including Ed Greenwood, also Matthew Mercer, the GM from Critical Role, and then John Wick is writing for the campaign as well. He's the author of 7th Sea RPG, which had an amazing, like, $1.2 million Kickstarter earlier this year.
Yeah, the largest tabletop role-playing Kickstarter ever.
Yeah. I didn't even realize it was that. But and what's cool is he didn't even have anything like sort of gimmicky with like physical content. It was like just the book. You know what I mean? And
Monty Cook did geocaching and all kinds of crazy stuff, and all he did was manage to go a little over $500,000. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, like, it's nothing. No. I mean, but anyway, so. So those guys are on the writing team, and people ask me all the time, like, how that happened. I don't know. When I approached those people and they saw, like, the website, I guess it looked good enough to
Seems
be
legit.
worthy of consideration. I don't know. I mean, each one has its own story about how I connected with them. I don't know if I want to go to that level of detail, but
Stalking, a little bit of stalking, I'm sure. Yeah.
Definitely some stalking. But yeah, no. So I'm super excited to have all those folks on the team, and you know, and then there are other writers too, like. If you guys have ever heard of a Twitch channel called Hyper RPG, one of the people who's contributing a lot is the producer there. His name's Ryan Chapals, and he's done some really great work for the setting. Like I talked about taking what I had and just completely changing it. He's really done that, and in my opinion, to great effect. So I'm, like, super excited about.
So I may be misinformed here. Correct me if I'm wrong. Did you also score some talent from Paizo and the Pathfinder people?
Yeah. I've got from that crowd, I have Savannah Broadway. So she's written for a bunch of like the core, like, Paizo books, or not. Sorry, I don't mean to say core. I mean, like,
The
non-third party.
Okay.
You know, because, you know, in Pathfinder you have all, like, the third-party publishers, right? And then there's Paizo proper. She's written a bunch of stuff for Paizo proper, right? And then there's also what was it? I just, like, lost my train of thought. Dan Dillon from
we've crossed paths.
Yeah. So Dan Dillon, I've loved working with Dan. He's got an amazing personality.
Hi, Dan, if you see this. I'm gonna ping him so he can see it.
Yeah, so Dan wrote for, like, the Southlands campaign setting, which is it's Kobold Press, right? That's his main thing, you know. So, and then they have this group called the Four Horsemen, which is, like, him and 3 other real well-known game designers in that circle.
So, because to be honest, like, we get stuff from people all the time, and they're like, "Hey, can you check out this thing I did in my mom's basement?" and I'm like, "Well, we get so much of that. There's no way we could possibly go through it
and cover it with any level of, like, depth at all."
Yeah, sure.
But when you reached out to me and I looked into what you were doing a little bit, I'm like, this has got my interest. There's some industry people in this. You know, you must be doing something right to have these people involved.
Right? Yeah, for sure.
So. Yeah, that's the hope. I think that. I mean, if this were to turn into a like a Q&A, advice, you know, ask. What's the advice column? I can't even think of it anymore. Ask
Dear
Abby, thank you. If this were a Dear Abby, right, for other game designers, I would say that the idea that your game is going to be so good on its own merits that you don't need, like, the backing of people in the industry, I think that's a big mistake people make. So I've always felt that, like, you know, you need to get people invested who are in the industry, and that's been my plan. If
you're going to go with this game can rest on its own laurels, it's going to take a long time to actually get anywhere.
Exactly.
You need to bring in people who can actually
amplify it.
Yes.
Right.
Well, I mean, just because like their name attached to it lends some legitimacy.
Yeah.
So actually, I do, because we did a video. Why Nerdarchy thinks you shouldn't design your own RPG. Right?
I was warned about this.
I would love to have you sort of outline the points of like why you thought you should, like the counter argument to that.
Sure.
And like you know, and it's not to be like that video is just like these are some of the obstacles you might face. So for the audience to hear that.
Yeah. Well, so I guess I'll pick up. I guess I do this a lot where I rabbit trail. So let's go back to where you asked about the history of the game. So let's go back there. So it was a tail into 4th edition. I felt real limited by 4th edition personally, like from a story perspective, because I felt like they really locked you into these, real limited options. I guess that's what frustrated me.
The mechanics are too in your face. In that system.
Exactly.
Kind of my take on it, but people are argument section below as DMG info gave us.
So there's that happening, and then like 5th edition started to be rumored about around the same time I started working on the game, and I guess I figured like, well, I really don't know much about 5th edition, and I don't know if they're going to fix these things that are frustrating me. So I kind of decided at that point to make my own game, because I was kind of, I guess, had reached my breaking point of being able to sort of like bear with what they were doing, and it just didn't really satisfy me from a gaming perspective anymore. So that's kind of how I got started. The spark, I think, that I often say is that I was, when I was trying to think of like what's my modus operandi, it was I want a game that could be the engine that runs behind or powers any book or movie that you might see. And I feel like, when you talk about wizards that like memorize their spells and mysteriously forget them every day, sorry, but I don't like that. You know what I mean? And
going away from Vancian, all right.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So
why not just play GURPS?
Or Savage Worlds.
Why not play GURPS or Savage Worlds? That's a great question. The simplest answer is that I had heard of GURPS, had never even heard of Savage Worlds at that point in my life, and I have since heard it because Savage Worlds is one of the games that Open Legend gets compared to. So for anybody who's interested, you know what I mean? Like I've heard a lot of people say that, but in Savage Worlds, like you're limited in terms of like how many dice you're rolling, whereas in Open Legend, because the dice explode, we want to push you toward rolling more so there are more chances of them exploding. And I just have felt like there's a lot more of a fun factor there than what I've just personally experienced from Savage Worlds. That's just my take. And GURPS, I don't know, maybe it's a stigma from all like tables after tables after tables, but it's just a little heavy.
But what about either Fate or Mutants and Masterminds? They've been around for a while as well.
Yeah, good point. In the case of those two games, so to be totally honest, like sometimes you just follow, what you feel led to do, and it's like I hadn't heard of those games at all at that point. When I started writing this, like I'm familiar now with Mutants and Masterminds and Fate and stuff like that, and there are similarities there. But I think Open Legend's very different still from those games.
I would say from what I've heard so far, like the one thing about Open Legends compared to more specifically Mutants and Mastermind, like your game is going to pay more of the homage and love of dice than Mutants and Masterminds, because you roll 1d20, and there are some things in that game that is a sticking point for some players. The way they do their health and life mechanic is really different, and someone who plays D&D has a lot of trouble switching over sometimes. They want hit point damage. They want to take hit point damage.
Or like White Wolf games where you have the wound system, right? So that's another thing. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a big. So one thing that's come up in interviews that I've done is people have said the game is weird because it's very, very different in many ways than existing RPGs. I mean, sure, it borrows from many, but if you put it all together, it's not very similar.
The amalgam is like, but some of the parts a bit of a chimera.
Absolutely. So I've gotten that a lot, but one thing that somebody said was that it's also like, it doesn't surprise you. Like the game system doesn't have like mechanics that are really like, for example, like Fate's ability for players to pull in and totally alter the course of the story or whatever. Like we don't have that kind of super unexpected mechanic, right? Okay. And so, for example, you said hit points are different and stuff. In Open Legend, hit points are the same as like D&D, and even defense scores tend to range between 10 and 20, just like in D&D. So there's a lot of familiarity as well, but then the actual like the crunchy, the mechanical aspects is also very different.
So I know a lot of people absolutely love or hate a Benny system.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about fate points and Cypher system has GM intrusion.
Yeah.
To a certain extent, Mutant Mastermind has hero points.
Yep.
But your game does have something. So I know you're calling it fate points. It'll probably be legend points.
Legend points will be yeah.
What exactly is that? Is that not a Benny system, or
it's most similar to Inspiration from 5th edition, but the difference is the layer that's like not even out there at the time of this recording, and maybe it will be when this gets launched, or it's coming in the next month or so, like before the Kickstarter. But the thing that's missing is like reinforcing your character's personality with like traits that are personality traits. So that piece is coming, and we're going to call it perks and flaws. And so perks give you the ability to just say like, hey, once per session I have elven eyes, so like once per session I can invoke the ability, tell the GM I'm using it, and then they, in that scenario, will find a way to make that relevant, right? That's the perk side. And then on the flaws side, if you're blind and you do something, you role play out something that is disadvantageous to your character, then you'll get a legend point. And so you can sort of so it's a way to reinforce role playing so that's the one piece that we don't have. Is the mechanics right now are very just focused on arbitrating the game, like, making sure that things are fair, like how many hit points things have, but the more narrative approach, like a dungeon world where you have bonds, you know what I mean? So that part is coming. So that's the legend point thing. But yeah, the difference is that in Open Legend, because you want to explode your dice, you can spend those points, and you also can get more than one. You can pool them, so you can get 5 points, 10 points, whatever, and then you can, like, on some epic action, you can just say, okay, I want advantage 5 on this, and then you have your best chance of like pulling out a really good roll when you need it or something like that.
So advantage in your system, because people that play 5th edition, they're kind of familiar with that, but in your system, is it like is it the same where you're rolling two? So is the two of the same dice and taking the better number? But it's expanded out to any dice that you roll? So
the way it works is advantage. So in Open Legend, you're always rolling a d20 for everything. So that's another example of the familiarity. And then you're also rolling your attribute dice. So your attribute dice, the lowest is a d4, and then that's at a 1 attribute, and it goes up to 3d10 at a 9 attribute, right? So we're bumping you towards multiple dice so that you have multiple chances of dice exploding, right? So the answer to your question is advantage does not affect the d20. It only affects the attribute dice.
Okay.
So if I have, for example,
does the d20 explode?
The d20 does absolutely explode, and when it does, it is fabulous. I've seen people roll 70, and it's just like the exploding d20 is so much fun. I can't even tell you, because I have seen people just lose their minds over like a roll, because you can see 50 or 60 or 70 total, which is like so much fun, because some games, your numeric total isn't like in White Wolf. You're just looking for X or higher on the die, right? In Open Legend, the total is meaningful. Like if you roll 50, there are very few adversaries that you could come up against that you won't just like one-shot kill with that roll. But the cool thing is, we're defining something even more like narrow than the 5%, which is a 20, a nat 20, right? It happens one time in 20. That's not all that rare. But in Open Legend, we take and we define out the rest of that curve, the bell curve, right? Which is like, there's the 1% rolls, there's the 0.01% rolls, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, so I'm a programmer, like that's my day job. I'm a computer programmer, and so like, the math part really gets me excited too.
Right, the statistical odds of something. You might just want to call, instead of legend point, just legend, because the thing somebody does with the total sum of those dice becomes the thing of legend. This epic fireball that just blows through the demon's chest. That's the tale and fable that it gets told in the realm.
Absolutely.
In 3rd edition, when you had to confirm your criticals, we had a house rule that if you crit it, and then you crit it again, the multiplier would increase, and it would keep increasing until you stopped rolling, rolling the 20.
Did you guys ever get 3 20s in a row? Because I had that happen.
Yes, it's very rare, but it does happen. And you're absolutely right. That is like amazing when it happens, especially like for nerds and geeks, and it doesn't sound all that impressive or that much fun, but when you're playing the game and it happens, like,
dude, people have lose.
It's a life changer.
Well, and then also if you
People
can
lose their
wrap,
damn minds.
if you can wrap a cool narrative moment around that whole thing, because what you've done is pretty epic in itself. So like the sword strike or the sword cleave with that sort of damage tied to it, like that's a significant attack.
Exactly.
So I will say though, in Pathfinder and in 3rd edition D&D, you could get 80s and 90s, but they all came from pluses.
yeah, that's nothing. I had a one time. This is hilarious. I had a Pathfinder, or it was 3.5. This was before the Pathfinder days. There was a. I went to a con, which was everybody was at a different table, but they're all part of the same story. It was very, very well done. I got to give props to the guys. They don't run the con anymore, but it was great. But we went there, my group. So I can go on the story side. I can go on the Twink Munchkin side also sometimes. It just depends on how I feel that day. But we knew that it was going to turn into PvP, and so we built this team. I played a Frenzied Berserker, which was the most broken thing in like 3.5, and. We had one guy that was a Kensei, so he could pump his base attack bonus into my character, and then another wizard that would give me like stone skin and invulnerability and all this stuff. I rolled like my minimum damage for that character, which had like a 12 to 20 threat range, for crits, was like 80 or something like that. That was the minimum damage, so I hear you.
Just fire. Just fire.
But the reason why I point it out is because you're achieving. You have the potential to achieve the same numbers or even greater. It sounds like.
Yeah.
But it's still all random. Like it's still generated by the dice. It's not.
I don't like
a preset character feature.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it's just personal preference. I don't like to bash on other games and stuff, but the stacking of the bonuses thing. I played Pathfinder for a while, and I don't really like that. Even though I did that in that example I just gave,
Well, I can say that those mathematical, numbers that rarely come up.
Anomalies.
Anomalies are great, and they do become stories of legend.
Absolutely.
In 2nd edition, well before we got into these great numbers, D&D had knockout chances.
Yeah.
And Dave was running a game where Nathan Nerdark was playing a monk. He had like an 8 strength. Well, he happened to... we were in a combat against a pair of ogres, and... he wound up doing a 1-2 punch, and he knocked them both out.
Nice.
And it was like a 5% on a D100 or something, or less.
He steps up, he uppercuts the one, jumps off his leg, crosses and knocks the other one down. It's like, all right, what are you guys doing?
I forgot. What now? There was System Shock, right, in 2nd edition, but that's different. I don't even remember that rule. What was that?
It was your bend bars, lift gates, but when you were in unarmed combat, that was your percentage for a knockout.
Oh, wow. I forgot. I completely forgot.
I don't even know if it was the rule or it was a house rule or whatever.
That was definitely the rules.
Or from a player's option, maybe, because there was a player's option.
The player's option was
we did it in 1st edition, so I don't know.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, so maybe that's just you guys. But anyway, it sounds like a lot of fun.
I have not forgotten that encounter. It was impressive.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, do you want to tell us about a little bit about the setting that you're working on?
Sure. Yeah. So the setting's called Amoria's Dawn, and the reason it's called Amoria's Dawn is because it's the dawn of a new world. Essentially, there's this sort of dying, very steampunk-esque kind of world that has lots of machines and pollution, and the city is like 5 layers tall, and it's 100 miles wide. It's like New York City on steroids. And then because they've run out of resources, and they're like conquering, an ever larger concentric ring of territory, and then all of their neighbors band against and prevent their outward sprawl. So now they have to recycle and all this other stuff. And anyway, they need resources to fuel the machine, and there's a portal that was opened 100 years ago. Nobody ever came back and returned from it, and so the Archmage Council of 3, who are the magocracy that rule over Schlechtenberg, they reopen this portal, step through, and they find themselves in this verdant jungle world called Amoria. And the story is there are many different jungle elven tribes, so there's a lot of each one has a very distinct and very different from each other kind of a feel. So there's one group that are called House Valurian, and they live in the acid swamp that eats away and destroys everything. So they've got these little huts that are above the swamp, and they're very like black magic, voodoo kind of New Orleans kind of feel. And then you've got House Nivenelia, which are like biomancers. So they've taken and because of all this like very abundant, verdant life, you know, in the world, they've taken and they modify and tinker with the basic building blocks of life. So they have all these mutant creatures, and they themselves are augmented and altered, and so that has a very sci-fi kind of a feel to it.
I like that.
What's that?
I said I like that.
Yeah, and honestly, a lot of this stuff is from Ryan, who I mentioned from Hyper RPG. He's one of my writers. This is one of those examples where my initial idea was, I think, pretty cool, but he just blew me out of the water with like it's like amazing. It's like the streets and the walkways, they live and breathe, and they sort of alter themselves, and everything's alive, and it's almost like, you know, like a hive kind of a thing. But there's this beauty component. You know, so like you think like Zerg from StarCraft, right, but then not really, because it has a beautiful and noble component to it, or something like that. Or the
James Cameron Avatar.
Yeah.
All the biofunctional things that they had.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. So the campaign has a lot of there's actually a lot of interest. There's adventure, you know, like you kind of go out into the wild and you explore and, you know, find all these crazy beasts. You can do things that way. My campaign that I've run for the last 2 years is highly political, so there's a lot of politics about why each tribe, for their own reason, each house is sort of unsuited to repel these invaders because of some hang up that they each have, right? So like if you get the setting and read over it, you'll learn more about, you know, like how they interact with each other, why they can't get along, why each of them is like has a problem.
So
you know
it's
what I mean?
Why it's ripe in this time in history now for these pioneers to come through this portal.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, really, because the reason that like Anglos were able to come into the Americas was because a plague had wiped out like 90% of the Native American population.
Sure.
So like timing is everything.
Yeah. So, it's definitely there's a component to that. I was like that.
So we're going to be playing this today. So it sounds like we're the bad guys.
Well,
a little bit.
That's a great.
It's all relative.
That's a great point. So actually, let me talk a little bit about that, because so in the campaign setting, the way I envision DMs running it, and they can do whatever they want with it, is that players will probably tend to be like renegades who are looking to escape from. So Schlechtenberg is like so polluted, it's just poison. Every day that you live there, you're likely to die because of all the pollution and whatever. You know, like your life is being like worn thin, so to speak, right? So everybody has a reason to want to get to the New World, but there are very limited options. So one is if you sign on for the military, because they need bodies, you can get to the New World. Another is you could have some, you know, your DM could make up something where you have a wealthy patron who's able to secure you passage to the New World. So the idea is that mostly they're just people who want freedom from like the awful state of the homeworld, Schlechtenberg. So you might be in the military, but you're planning to defect as soon as you get there, right? That's how my party started anyway. So you guys aren't necessarily bad. You know, you can have your own motivations for why, you know, you want to seek freedom or whatever. Just, I mean, it's like people coming to, you know, America, right? Early colonists and stuff, you know, seeking like religious freedom or something like that, you know.
Right. Or just land and opportunities as being a venture capitalist in a way.
Right.
Early day venture capitalism.
So, I mean, that does raise some interesting moral questions, because if you actually go with your city's best interest in mind, or with what they've sent you there to do, you know, you're basically trying to destroy this other world. I mean, because that's what they do. Apparently,
colonize.
Destroy.
When you colonize, somebody was there. Like there usually was someone there. You move where they go.
But you're going for resources, and you want to strip the resources to keep doing what they've been doing.
Again, that's what colonization is called. That's the effects of colonization. Like whether people call it by another name or not. Like when you colonize a pioneer, usually is displacing whoever was formerly there. So
yeah, but you don't have to. You can go and you can live in an environmental friendly way where you're saying, no, I'm here to wipe this place out just like we did before, and then hopefully we can find somewhere else to portal to next.
Right.
You don't have to do that. That's a conscious choice.
Yeah, and that's very central to how my campaigns played out. That's, I imagine, many people who play the campaign setting will have the same experience where it's all about. So of course there's a villain, who, General Paxson, who wants to just reap and sow and just destroy everything and whatever, and so that's a thing. But then there are other NPCs in the world who have different ideas about how things should go, right? So the idea is that players find themselves, and then I've had some people tell me that, like, if they're playing in the campaign, they would really want to play like a native, like somebody that's an elf from Amoria,
right?
And that's totally cool, and we have that too, where people are. But I have a little bit of a long-term thing for my. I don't even know if this will make it into the writing. So this may be like super top secret, privileged information. But my idea for it was that whether the characters actually pursue this or actually get there is a different matter. But I thought that it's kind of cool that both worlds actually, in a strange way, have something to learn from each other, and in a good way, not in a patronizing, we are superior to you and we're going to teach you. I mean, there's a mutual sharing of information and learning. So like the House Nivenelia, for example, these biomancers, right? They skipped right over the machine age. They're able to sort of intuitively engineer things from a biological perspective. So there's a lot of value there because, right, that's like renewable, right? So it's almost a little bit about technology as well because of that whole, aspect. So whether people pursue that in their campaign setting, I don't know. I'm probably getting too philosophical now.
Well, no, I would see in a game like that, like the environmentalist movements popping up, and someone going, "Hey, can't we learn from the sins of our past and do a better way?"
Exactly.
And then they're immediately suppressed by the regime.
Well, yeah, that's exactly what would happen.
Well, and that's what the. So there's I won't spoil this because this might, if somebody's a player, this might be a little bit of a spoiler, so I'll just hint at it. There's a thing where, there's a part that has to do with war profiteering, right? Where they're trying to amp up a war, and manufacture a war, and so there's a certain group that are sort of pulling strings behind the scenes in an attempt to sort of, manufacture that kind of hostility or whatever.
Well, it would make sense because an overabundance of population puts an extra strain on resources.
Yep.
Historically, whenever that happens, war springs up.
Yeah,
like magic.
Yeah, exactly, like magic.
Yeah.
So, but I enjoy the campaign setting a lot. It's my favorite. I always in my GM history, I'm weird. I don't even use pre-published stuff personally. I always write my own world, so this is like the 10th world that I've written, and this is by far my favorite one. That's why it's the campaign setting that is going with the core rules.
Well, on that, we'll leave off here. We're going to do a couple more videos so you guys will get more information. So with that, you can put your comments below while you're at it. Like, share, and subscribe.
You can check us out over on Facebook.
Or you can check us out over on nerdarchy.com.
So until next time,
stay nerdy.
Right, so the mechanics define the effect.
Yeah.
But what that effect looks like, how it interacts with the world, that kind of is up to the player to interpret.
Absolutely. And it also has that sort of that asset of being sort of setting gnostic, where you could play modern, you could play superheroes, or you could play fantasy, and the system will do all those things eloquently enough, right?
Absolutely, yeah, and that's and like in our first campaign setting, which is a companion for the Kickstarter, it's the core rules plus the campaign setting. We have really strong elements of steampunk, sort of modern, and then there's a sci-fi element, and then there's a high fantasy magic element. So that's just an example of blending genres and stuff like that. So
I think one thing has to be mentioned since you showed up in uniform. It's very important to us. The running joke is our uniform is beard and glasses. So you came ready to... Hey guys, Dave from Nerdarchy, for nerds, by nerds, hanging with these nerds, plus Brian Feister today.
Hey, I'm Ryan.
I'm Ted.
And today we'll be talking about a brand new RPG that's in development. It'll be coming out soon. The Kickstarter is going to be launching very shortly. The Oping Legend RPG.
If you want to jump down to the description below, you can sign up for Nerdarchy, the newsletter. It's a great way to get gaming tips as well as learn how to game with Nerdarchy.
And also find the link to this Kickstarter when it's live.
Exactly.
Nice.
So, well, we can link to the to your website, absolutely, so they can find you. And there's also, if you check out Encounter Roleplay, there's a ton of gameplay videos out there, and we're also going to be shooting a gameplay later on today, so you'll be able to check that out as well. So I guess let's kick it back to you, Brian, a little bit about you and why you felt the need to create Open Legend.
I created Open Legend during the dark ages of role-playing game history, which was the end of 4th edition.
So you felt an urge with that. A man was chosen to rise amongst the ranks to create a new role-playing game. It's like the opening of the Hercules Kevin Sorbo version.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, you nailed it. Yes, that's what happened. I liked, and actually, what's funny is a lot of people. It's real popular and easy to take shots at 4th edition, but I have borrowed some great stuff from 4th edition that is in Open Legend actually. So we'll talk more about that later. But long story short, I felt like a lot of the mechanics really controlled the dialogue of like sort of how the game played out and the narrative behind the game. And Open Legend is very much about the opposite, where the mechanics take a back seat, or they serve as a way to make sure the game is fair, and that's what rules are for, right? And then but it takes a backseat to the story because many of those mechanics, or each mechanic, can be connected to many different storytelling narratives. So, for example, we have this concept of banes, right? So persistent damage is a bane, and that could either be bleeding damage from like a rogue sneak attack, or it could be poison damage, from a poisoned weapon, or a mage's fire that just keeps burning and burning you after, right? And so the idea is that we don't step in and introduce an opinion there. Players are free to do whatever they want. But the mechanics just make sure that it's quantified, right? Because that's what we need, is just to make sure like you're X level and X power, and therefore you do X and Y damage and stuff like that.
So in a lot of ways, we're very familiar with this from Mutants and Masterminds, where a lot of the game that you've created is effect based. Right? Work today. Yeah. That's always a bonus.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I noticed. I've watched some of you guys' videos, and I thought that was funny too. So I didn't know that. I did not catch the reference to it being the official uniform, but yeah,
it's not in every video.
We're all walking cliches.
Me too.
So you have this sort of open source game system, but then you're definitely building a world around it. So is that very well fleshed out? Is like a lot of the fiction sort of shaped already for it?
The world?
Yeah.
World. Absolutely. A lot of it is shaped. I've been running this campaign setting for 2 years now, and so I've been building it while I was running it. So my inner circle of my like dev team, where I've tested and hammered out the rules and the mechanics themselves. This is the story from that game, right? So yeah, a lot of it's been hammered out over a while, and then now there's like a whole different crew of writers that are on the team that are totally